Good evening. Here we are once again. Sunday night, time to do a little bit of reading. We actually, we're still reading in Forbidden History. And we have 3 short articles to get through tonight to finish out this section. So we'll just jump right on into it. So the first one here is Fingerprinting the Gods. A best-selling author is making a convincing case for a great but officially forgotten civilization. And this article is by J. Douglas Kenyon, the editor of these books. Although few people would question the popularity of the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, no academic worth his salt ever dared to say the movie was more than a Hollywood fantasy either. So when the respected British author Graham Hancock announced to the world in 1992 that he had actually tracked the legendary Ark of the Covenant of Old Testament fame to a modern-day resting place in Ethiopia, serious eyebrows everywhere twitched upward. Nevertheless, objective readers of his monumental volume, The Sign and the Seal, on both sides of the Atlantic, soon realized that Hancock's case, incredible though it seemed, was not to be easily dismissed. The exhaustively researched work went on to enjoy widespread critical acclaim and to become a bestseller in both America and the United Kingdom, as well as the subject of several television specials. I just realized I'm on the wrong page there. There we go. Hancock's writing and journalistic skills had been honed during stints in as a war correspondent in Africa for The Economist and the London Sunday Times. Winner of an honorable mention in the H.I. Mencken Award, the Lords of Poverty, 1990. He also authored African Ark, Peoples of the Horn, and Ethiopia, the Challenge of Hunger. In The Sign and the Seal, Hancock was credited by The Guardian with having invented a new genre, an intellectual whodunit by a do-it-yourself sleuth. Apparently, though, the success of The Sign and the Seal only whetted the writer's appetite for establishment chagrin. His subsequent book, Fingerprints of the Gods, The Evidence of Earth's Lost Civilization, sought nothing less than to overthrow the cherished doctrine taught in classrooms worldwide that civilization was born roughly 5,000 years ago. Anything earlier, we have been told, was strictly primitive. In one of the most comprehensive efforts on the subject ever, more than 600 pages of meticulous research, Hancock presents breakthrough evidence of a forgotten epoch in human history that preceded by thousands of years the presently acknowledged cradles of civilization in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Far East. Moreover, he argues this same lost culture was not only highly advanced, but also technologically proficient, and was destroyed more than 12,000 years ago by the global cataclysm that brought the Ice Age to its sudden and dramatic conclusion. So they're talking about the Younger Dryas there. Ended roughly 12 to 12,500 years ago. Kirkus Reviews called Fingerprints of the Gods, quote, a fancy piece of historical sleuthing, breathless but intriguing and entertaining and sturdy enough to give a long pause for thought, end quote. Graham Hancock discussed Fingerprints of the Gods with Atlantis Rising, wherein he indicated that the book was enjoying the kind of favorable media attention that helped to make The Sign and the Seal an American hit. Interviewers, Hancock felt, were generally positive and open to his ideas, though the reception among academics had been something less than cordial. That was to be expected. Quote, one of the reasons the book is so long, he explained, is that I've really tried to document everything very thoroughly so that the academics have to deal with the evidence rather than me as an individual or with what they like to think are rather vague, wishy-washy ideas. I've tried to nail it all down to hard fact as far as possible, end quote. Nailing down the facts took Hancock on a worldwide odyssey that included stops in Peru, Mexico, and Egypt. Among the many intriguing mysteries that the author was determined to investigate fully were ancient maps showing precise knowledge of the actual coastline of Antarctica, notwithstanding the fact that the location has been buried under thousands of feet of ice for many millennia. Stone building technology beyond our present capacity to duplicate in Central and South America as well as Egypt. Sophisticated archaeoastronomical alignments at ancient sites all over the world, evidence of comprehensive ancient knowledge of the 25,776-year precession of the equinoxes, unmistakably encoded into ancient mythology and building sites, even though the phenomena would have taken at a minimum many generations of systematic observation to detect, and which conventional scholarship tells us was not discovered until the Greek philosopher Hipparchus in about 150 BCE. Water erosion of the Great Sphinx dating it to before the coming of desert conditions to the Giza Plateau, as researched by the American scholar John Anthony West and the geologist Robert M. Schoch, Ph.D. And finally, evidence that the monuments of the Giza Plateau were built in alignment with the Belt of Orion at circa 10,500 BCE, as demonstrated by the Belgian engineer Robert Bouvel. So those are the things he wanted to investigate. Unfettered as he is by the constraints under which many so-called specialists operate, Hancock sees himself uniquely qualified to undertake such a far-reaching study. Quote, one of the problems with academics, and particularly academic historians, he says, is that they have a very narrow focus, and as a result, they are very myopic. That, I think, is true. Hancock is downright contemptuous of organized Egyptology, which he places in the particularly short-sighted category, quote, there's a rigid paradigm of Egyptian history, he complains, that seems to function as a kind of filter on knowledge and which stops Egyptologists as a profession from being even the remotest bit open to any other possibilities at all, end quote. In Hancock's view, Egyptologists tend to behave like priests in a very narrow religion, dogmatically and irrationally, if not superstitiously. Quote, a few hundred years ago they would have burned people like me and John West at the stake, he says, laughing. Such illogical zealotry, Hancock fears, stands in the way of the public's right to know about what could be one of the most significant discoveries ever made in the Great Pyramid. In 1993, the German inventor Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a robot with a television camera up a narrow shaft from the Queen's chamber and discovered what appeared to be a door with iron handles. That door, Hancock suspects, might lead to the legendary Hall of Records of the ancient Egyptians. But whatever is behind it, he feels it must be properly investigated. So far, though, there has been no official action, at least not a public one. Citing episodes personally witnessed, he protests, quote, you have Egyptologists saying there is no point in looking to see if there's anything behind that slab. They call it a slab. They won't call it a door, because we know there's not another chamber inside the Great Pyramid, end quote. The attitude infuriates Hancock. Quote, I wonder how they know that about this 6 million ton monument that has room for 3,000 chambers the same size as the King's Chamber. How do they have the temerity and the nerve to suggest that there's no point in looking, end quote. The tantalizing promise of that door has led Hancock to speculate that the builders may have purposely arranged things to require technology of ultimate explorers. Quote, nobody could get in there unless we had a certain level of technology, he says. End quote, he says. And he points out that even 100 years ago, we didn't have the means to do it. In the last 20 years, the technology has been developed, and now the shaft has been explored. Quote, and lo and behold, at the end is a door with handles. It's like an invitation to come on in and look inside when you're ready, end quote. Hancock is far from sanguine about official intentions. Quote, if that door ever does get open, Probably there will be no public access to all at all to what happens, end quote. He would like to see an international team present, but suspects that instead, quote, what we're going to get in is a narrow elite group of Egyptologists who will strictly control information about what happens, end quote. In fact, he thinks it's possible that they've even been in there already. The Queen's Chamber was suspiciously closed for more than 9 months after Gantenbrink made his discovery. Quote, the story was given out that they were cleaning the graffiti off the walls, but the graffiti was never cleaned off. I wonder what they were doing in there for those 9 months. There's what really makes me angry, that this narrow group of scholars control knowledge of what is, at the end of the day, the legacy of the whole of mankind, end quote. End quote. Gantenbrink's door is not the only beckoning portal on the Giza Plateau. Hancock is really interested in the chamber that John Anthony West and Robert M. Schoch, Ph.D., in the course of investigating the weathering of the Sphinx, detected by seismic methods beneath the Sphinx's paws. Either location might prove to be the site of the Hall of Records. In both cases, the authorities have resisted all effort at further investigation. That's really what makes me suspicious of the whole thing. Why are they resisting it? Why would they not be eager to look into anything to find out more about it? Hancock believes the entire Giza site was constructed after the crust of the Earth had stabilized following a 30-degree crustal displacement that destroyed most of the high civilization when then standing. According to Rand and Rose Flem Aths, Where the Sky Fell in Search of Atlantis, upon which Hancock relies, that displacement had moved an entire continent from temperate zones to the South Pole, where it had been buried under mountains of ice. This, he believes, is the real story of the end of Plato's Atlantis, but the A word is not mentioned until very late in his book. Quote, I see no point in giving a hostile establishment a stick to beat me with, he says. It's purely a matter of tactics, end quote. The Giza complex was built, Hancock speculates, as part of an effort to remap and reorient civilization. For that reason, he believes the 10,500 BCE date demonstrated by Bovell to be especially important. Quote, the pyramids are a part of saying this is where it stopped. That's why the perfect alignment, for example, to due north of the Great Pyramid is extremely interesting, because they obviously would have had a new north at that time. End quote. Despite a determination to stick with the hard evidence, Hancock is not uncomfortable with the knowledge that his work is serving to corroborate the claims of many intuitives and mystics. On the contrary, he believes that, quote, the clairvoyant ability of human beings is another one of those latent faculties that modern rational science simply refuses to recognize. I think we're a much more mysterious species than we give ourselves credit for. Our whole cultural conditioning is to deny those elements of intuition and mystery in ourselves. But all the indications are that these are in fact vital faculties in human beings, and I suspect that the civilization that was destroyed, although technologically advanced, was much more spiritually advanced than we are today. End quote. Such knowledge, he believes, is part of the legacy of the ancients that we must strive to recover. Quote, what comes across again and again, he says, particularly from documents like the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts, which I see are as containing the legacy of knowledge and ideas from the lost civilization, is a kind of science of immortality, a quest for the immortality of the soul, a feeling that immortality may not be guaranteed at all, and everybody simply by being born. It may be something that has to be worked for, something that results from the focused power of the mind. End quote. The real purpose of the pyramids, he suggests, may be to teach us how to achieve immortality. But before we can understand, we must recover from the ancient amnesia. Hancock believes we're a species with amnesia. Quote, I think we show all the signs that there's a traumatic episode in our past that is so horrible that we cannot somehow bring ourselves to recognize it. Just as the victim suffering from amnesia as a result of some terrible episode fears awakening memory of that trauma and tries to avoid it, so we have done collectively, end quote. The amnesia victim is, of course, forced to return to the source of his pain and, quote, if you wish to move forward and continue to develop as an individual, you have to overcome it. You have to confront it, deal with it, see it face to face, realize that what it means, get over it, and get on with your life, he says. That is what society needs to be doing, end quote. In the institutional resistance to considering ancient achievement, Hancock sees a subconscious pattern based on fear. Quote, there's a huge impulse to deny all of this because suddenly all the foundations get knocked out from under you and you find yourself swimming loosely in space without any points of reference anymore, end quote. The process needn't be so threatening, though. Quote, if we can go through that difficult experience and come out on the other side, he says, I think we will all emerge better from it. I'm more and more convinced that the reason we are so messed up and confused and totally disturbed as a species at the end of the 20th century is because of this, because we've forgotten our past, end quote. If it is true that those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it, then there are lessons in our past that can be ignored only at our own peril. Clearly written into the mythology of many societies are stories of cataclysmic destruction. Hancock cites the work of Giorgio de Santillana of MIT, an authority on the history of science, who is the co-author, along with Hertha von Dachshund, of the book Hamlet's Mill, an essay investigating the origins of human knowledge and its transmission through myth, in which the authors hypothesize that an advanced scientific knowledge was encoded into ancient myth. Hancock points out, quote, once you accept that mythology may have originated with highly advanced people, then you have to start listening to what the myths are saying, end quote. What the myths are saying, he believes, is that a great cataclysm struck the world and destroyed an advanced civilization and a golden age of mankind, and cataclysm is a recurrent feature in the life of the earth and will return. The messages from many ancient sources, including the Bible, point to the recurrence of such a cataclysm in our lifetime. Notwithstanding such views, Hancock insists he is not a prophet of doom. His point is, he says, quote, we've received a legacy of extraordinary knowledge from the past, and the time has come for us to stop dismissing it. Rather, we must recapture that heritage and learn that what we can from it, because there is vitally important information in it, end quote. The stakes couldn't be higher. Quote, I'm convinced that we're locked today in a battle of ideas, he says. I think it's desperately important that the ideas that will lead to a recovery of our memory as a species triumph, and therefore we have to be strong, we have to be eloquent and argue clearly and coherently. We have to see what our opponents are going to do, how they are going to try to get at us, and the dirty tricks that they are going to try and play. We have to fight them on their own ground, end quote. And end article. Give me just a second to check something. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. All right. I want to get into the next article, which is also fairly short, but I have something in the oven that needs to come out in just a few minutes. So bear with me. I will be right back.
My heart is beat. I know the pieces. One is broken, one is beat. Because I have seen apart. I have known possibly. I didn't have anything to say. Follow your heart. Don't say if you leave it behind. Someone will bring. I left you my heart. What did you do? You still you left me all sharp. Was my love? Was it love? You have no answers. Don't know without you. How will I survive?
Okay, so let's jump into, unless anybody has any thoughts on the other article, kind of stuff we've read before. I mean, a little bit of a repeat of stuff we read earlier in the book. Talking about Graham Hancock a lot and his theories on the pyramids and stuff. I mean, kind of driving home that idea that the establishment is very resistant to any new ideas or anything outside of the already accepted iron, chiseled in stone interpretation of what everything is. Although it did mention the idea of what am I trying to say? The idea that the Hall of Records, that's the term he used. The Hall of Records could be in the Great Pyramid of Khufu, Cheops, or in the chamber between the paws of the Sphinx, and that they're resistant to both. They're also, I've seen stuff, and I don't know if it's true or not, but there's also supposed to be a chamber in the back of the Sphinx, right behind the head, kind of between the shoulder blades. There's supposed to be, supposedly, there is the opening for a chamber, and I've seen pictures. They could have been photoshopped. I don't know, but they have seen pictures showing the opening and a ladder going down, but all of the reports say no one's allowed to go in there. So, I don't know. Could also just be bunk. But anyway, getting into the second article, the Central American Mystery. What could explain the failure of mainstream science to unravel the origins of Mesoamerica's advanced ancient cultures? By Will Hart. And right here on the very first page, I'll go ahead and show it, is an Olmec statue. There we go. There, focus. There we go. That is an Olmec statue face, which the Olmecs are totally different than everybody else, at least what I know about them. I don't think we know a whole ton about the Olmecs. Anyway, it has been 23 years, yet I remember the morning like it was yesterday. A mist shrouded the jungle above the temple of the inscriptions. A series of roaring sounds suddenly split the silence. As a band of howler monkeys made their way through the trees, it startled me. I thought the sounds might be those of a jaguar, but the cacophony added to the sense of mystery. My head was exploding. By the time I had reached Palenque, or Palenque, Palenque, I'm going to say Palenque. We had already visited dozens of archaeological sites, but from the northernmost part of Mexico down to the Yucatan Peninsula and Quintana Roo. Quintana Roo, I don't recognize that. I may have heard it before, but I don't recognize it. I was steeped in questions and mysteries. Several things had become clear to me. The cultures that built the pyramids and other buildings had been advanced in the arts and sciences. I had seen many beautiful things, as well as mind-tugging enigmas. The Olmec civilization surprised me the most. I had read about the Maya and knew of the Aztecs, but I was unprepared for what I found in Villahermosa. Large stone heads with negroid features and stone stelae carved with depictions of curious ambassadors. The figures clearly were not from any Mexican culture. These artifacts were more than just a fascinating puzzle. They represented a headache for science. They were an anomaly. Who had carved the heads? Who had created the stelae? Where did they get the models for these heads and figures? There were questions that arose because of the way scientists have reconstructed the human history of Mesoamerica. Africans don't fit, nor do the cloaked Caucasian figures carved on the stelae. They shouldn't be there, however, they are surely there. Scientists do not claim to have solved this enigma. Anthropologists and archaeologists admit they do not know much of anything about Olmec culture. Thus, we don't know the ethnic group or the language, and we know nothing of the Olmec social organization, beliefs, or traditions. No one has any idea why they carved the helmeted heads and then buried them. It doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't usually bury monuments if that is what they are. The only records we have are the monuments they left behind, which are impressive. But how do we understand them? Where do they fit into the mosaic of human history? There are no direct clues in Mexico. The Olmecs didn't... Oh, sorry. That was my timer. The only records we have are of the monuments they left behind, which were impressive, but how do we understand them? Where do they fit into the mosaic of human history? There are no direct clues in Mexico. The Olmecs didn't leave us any written records. However, we do have a clue. Before I go on, how do they know the Olmecs buried them? That's my first question. Because they could have been buried by the Mayans or the Aztecs later on. We don't know for sure who. I mean, maybe they've dated it to pre-Mayan culture, so they know the Olmecs buried them. I'm just asking the question, but it's the same kind of question I have about Göbekli Tepe. Why did they bury it? And why did they bury it right at 12,500 years ago? We know it was deliberately buried. Why was it buried then? Just a question. Anyway, moving on. The Bible is an extremely important document It doesn't matter whether or not you are a believer. It contains a very ancient accounting of human history, compiled from a variety of early sources. At least this is true of the book of Genesis, but it is not always easy to decode. Do we find any references in the Bible that might help us solve the Olmec enigma? And I know people that are true believers of the Bible probably take offense to that, but it's just this guy's opinion. Get over it. Turning to Genesis chapter 11, we read, quote, "Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words," end quote. This indicates that there was a period in man's history when a global human civilization existed. We learned that during that epoch, men wanted to build a tower. Quote, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make our own selves a name, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." End quote. The fact that the Olmec civilization presents science with an anomaly indicates something quite profound. The data does not fit the current model. Scientists can't change the observable data. Ugh. It is as hard as data can get, but they could change the model to conform to the data. There is the rub. Anthropologists and archaeologists have a huge investment in that model, an intellectual edifice that has been built up over generations. That is for damn sure. Like a lot of sciences now, it's already been decided, and so if you want to do research, you're going to do research that shows what's already been decided, or you're going to be made a pariah in your field. Scientists would rather ignore the tough questions and leave the Olmecs alone in the dim mists of forgotten antiquity. That is not a very scientific approach. What is the pursuit? Where is the pursuit of truth? What happened to the scientific method? Is it just not acceptable? Why? Oh, it is not. It is just not acceptable. Why? Some ancient society built the huge mound, dragged the basalt heads about 60 miles from the quarry to the burial site. Those heads weighed from 5 to 25 tons, and carved the figures into the stele. If you don't know what a stele is, it's a standing stone that is carved. It's almost like they can be kind of pillar-like, but in a lot of ways they're almost more like a headstone in a grave. They're a slab that's standing upright, and it's carved on one or both sides. That's my quick down and dirty explanation of them. They wouldn't have gone to all that trouble unless the people the monuments represented were important to them. This is a logical assumption to make, and we can only hope that scientists in the distant future will reach the same conclusion when they study Mount Rushmore. Since we have the artifacts, we know that there has to be an explanation for who the builders were. As with any other mystery, you search for clues. You begin in the most likely places and work your way down the list. Mexico. The problem is that the Olmecs disappeared from the scene long before Cortez arrived. None of the cultures contemporary with the Aztecs made any reference to the Olmecs. They seemed to know nothing about them, and no other Negroid heads have been found in Mesoamerica. Another curious fact is that the developmental period that must have preceded the mound building and head carving is nowhere in evidence. So, right there, he kind of answered my question. The Aztecs, at least, knew nothing about the Olmecs, and they made no mention of them, or at least they made no mention of them. And we know that the Aztecs used Mayan ruins to some extent. They found them and sometimes changed them, made them their own, but they are actually Mayan ruins. Anyway, the Olmecs just suddenly appeared, then disappeared. It took me years of investigation to finally realize that the most probable answer was in the Bible, and ironically, the Bible was just about the last place I had thought to look. Did the Olmecs come from outer space, or as some researchers have proposed? Not necessarily. For one thing, there is no evidence to support this theory. Second, the Negroid heads and the people depicted on the stele are obviously human. The idea that there was a global civilization in ancient times does not conform to the current model of science. However, it is corroborated by the reference in the Bible. The problem with the scientific model is that it can't explain the available data, and that is a serious issue that has many consequences. If the problem was limited to the Olmec civilization, we might just let it go, but there are artifacts in Egypt, South America, and other parts of Mexico that also don't fit the orthodox scheme. Scientists have often shown a willful blindness regarding artifacts and developments that they can't explain using their belief system. Worse, they have either ignored key questions or discredited the facts. Many other hard facts, the remains of lost civilizations, and the cultural records of numerous peoples corroborate the Olmec enigma and the Bible. References to a cataclysmic flood occurred in 230 different cultures. Mayan history includes the story of how the Maya came from a land to the east that had been destroyed. Herodotus's history recounted of the tale of lost Atlantis. Accounts such as these may sound like romantic myths spun out of early imaginations. However, when you stand at an ancient site surrounded by strange ruins, you begin to wonder if they just might contain more than a grain of truth. I climbed the steps of the Temple of Inscriptions and visited the tomb of Pakal. When I decided to take a long trip down to the Rio Usumacinta, never seen that word before, to Bonampak and Yaxchilan, it was 100 miles of bad dirt road, heavily rutted in places. It finally became so muddy that we mired the van up to the axles. We had nearly reached the destination. Bonampak was a short walk. I visited Bonampak. My next destination was Yaxchilan. That's a weird Yaxchilan. Yaxchilan? I'm not sure. A ruin secreted in the jungle about 8 miles. My way there with a machete. Against the advice of the natives who had warned me, La selva está cerrado. They were right. I gave up after a grueling 4-hour stint in which I traveled less than a quarter of a mile. Spent mostly on my belly trying to avoid razor-sharp thorn shrubs. The insects were ravaging my body. Yaxchilan is situated on a river and is alleged to have been the center of the flourishing Mayan civilization in this region. In February 1989, James Occult did manage to make it to this site, one that archaeologists had been studying for a century. A particular mound of rocks caught Occult's trained eye. Scientists had dismissed it as a minor mystery, but the amateur archaeologist was also a forensic engineer, and he immediately knew what this mound really was, part of a bridge. He turned to modern technology to help prove a bridge had once existed at the site. Occult, a former chairman of the Forensic Council of the American Society of Civil Engineers, had used similar techniques during routing investigations. He compiled field information at the Maya site and used computers to integrate archaeological studies, aerial photos, and maps to develop a three-dimensional model of the site and to determine the exact positioning and dimensions of the bridge. Occult ended up making a startling discovery. The Maya had constructed the longest bridge span in the ancient world. When he finished his calculations, the computer models, the bridge turned out to be 600 a 600-foot span, a hemp rope suspension structure with 2 piers and 3 spans. It connected Yaxchilan in Mexico with its agricultural domain in the Petén, now Guatemala, where Tikal is situated. What the archaeologists had assumed was an insignificant rock pile turned out to be part of a crucial finding. A pier 12 feet high and 35 feet in diameter. Aerial photos located a second support pier on the opposite side of the river. Both piers were constructed of cast-in-place concrete with an exterior of stone masonry, which is exactly how the Mayan pyramids were made. In interviews, Occult, who had been studying the ancient Maya for 30 years, said, quote, "The Maya were very sophisticated mathematically and scientifically," end quote. He claimed that the design requirements of the Maya bridge paralleled 20th century bridge design criteria. Today we marvel at the ruins and speculate on how and why the Maya built the ceremonial sites. We shouldn't forget that they were an advanced race. They understood astronomy. They had an accurate calendar. They understood the concept of zero, at least 700 years before the Europeans did. The Maya built paved roads, and as we have now learned, the longest suspension bridge in the ancient world. What occurred to me while standing atop another pyramid at Koba in Quintana Roo, surveying a trackless jungle, was the fact that the Maya had achieved all this in a jungle. No other advanced civilization I could think of had emerged from a jungle environment. It deepens the mystery of this lost race. The Sakbe, S-A-C, no, Sakbe, that's a B, S-A-C-B-E. The Sakbe are a system of roads that interconnect the sites. This is another feature that has long puzzled scientists and independent investigators alike. The roads were built up with rocks leveled and paved over with limestone cement. They vary in width from 8 feet to 30 feet. The mystery is simple. Why would a Stone Age people without wheeled vehicles or dray animals need such an elaborate and sophisticated road network? Occult turned his attention to the Sakbe after finishing his work on the bridge and discussed the fact that he had found the 60-mile road that extended from Koba to Yazuna to be as straight as an arrow with a negligible deviation. His studies have revealed that Maya were not Stone Age. He refers to them as Technolithic. They didn't use iron because the nearest mines were 1,500 miles away, Occult claims. They, quote, "they used jade tools and they were harder than steel," end quote. You almost have to stand at a site and imagine the scene as it was during the peak of Mayan civilization to really grasp the magnitude and appreciate what this culture achieved. Today we see ruins and jungle and pyramids that are little more than bare stone, crumbling buildings surrounded by wilderness. However, in that day the pyramids were coated with stucco. They were smooth and they gleamed in the sun. The walls of the structures were painted in various designs of bright colors. The courtyards were paved. The flat white roads radiated out in all directions, connecting the centers. Yet, despite the Maya's advanced knowledge of astronomy and mathematics and their achievements in art and architecture, scientists still consider them a Stone Age culture. Time is the essence of life. Human beings have always been immersed in it and have kept track of it in one way or another, measuring it as minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, centuries, and millennia. We know of many of its dimensions, and we have used them to our advantage. We know supposedly how long ago dinosaurs roamed the earth, how long it takes for various radioactive isotopes to decay. When our early hominid ancestors branched off from apes, the layout of the human genome, the exact dates of lunar and solar eclipses long into the future. Time causes all living things to grow old and die. It seems so obvious and ubiquitous. We are like fish, and time is water. We never ask the basic questions. What is time? Do we understand it? Is it more than a system of measurement, whether of the present moment or of the age of the universe? All cultures certainly have a focus on time. However, the Maya had an obsession with it. They tracked and measured the synodic period of Venus, which is 584 Earth days. The 365-day Mayan calendar year was more precise than the Gregorian calendar. They devised 3 different calendrical systems: the Tzolk'in sacred calendar, the Haab civil calendar, and the long count. The Tzolk'in is a cycle of 260 days, 13 months of 20 days each. And the Haab is the solar cycle. These 2 calendars were combined in an interlocking fashion to produce a cycle of 18,980 days, which was known as a calendar round, about 52 years. Each day had a particular glyph and meaning ascribed to it, and at the end of the 52-year cycle, a renewal ceremony would be performed. The long count period lasted for about 5,000 years. This was equivalent to an age. According to the Maya, humanity is in the 5th sun or age. That will end about 5,000 years from the beginning of their calendar, which started in 3011 BCE and expires in 2012. So, as we all know, these are old articles. They're from the late 90s and very early 2000s. The longest cycle in Maya cosmology is 26,000 years, which corresponds to the precession of the equinox. Why did the Maya have such a fascination with astronomy? Why did they create such an intricate calendrical system? Would a Stone Age agrarian society need all this advanced astronomical and mathematical knowledge? How did they acquire it in such a short time? How would they have had any awareness of such a complex phenomena as the synodic length of Venus or the precession of the equinoxes? The Maya are either more ancient than science allows, or they had more sophisticated technology than we know of. Perhaps someone passed down this knowledge to them? Is it coincidental that the beginning of the 5th age was 3000 BCE, which corresponds to the birth of the Jewish and Chinese calendars? The assertion that the world is only 5,000 years old may have more truth to it than we know. Is it also a coincidence that so many Christians believe we are now in the end of times? The Mayan obsession with time may have been based on a deep awareness of how it functions on a cosmic scale and then unfolds on Earth in short and long-term cycles. That may be the message that the lost civilizations have been trying to deliver to us, and we may just be starting to get it. And there is the end of the second article. The next one is just a little over 6 pages. So, I am just going to go plow right on into it because I still have a gaming stream to do tonight. But I want to finish this section, and that finishes section 3 and gets us into section 4 of this book, which is Searching for the Fountainhead, and it's going to be about Atlantis mostly, I think. Okay. Destination Galactic Center. John Major Jenkins thinks today's world has much to learn from the ancient Maya, by Moira Timms. Ancient Maya trumpets erupt in a wash of primal shamanic sound. The huge dome of the planetarium, like some fish-eye lens, glows with myriad pre-dawn stars. As the sun rises and breaks through the artificial horizon to everyone's left, the ancient music fades, and the crack between the worlds is opened once more. In his calm, focused way, the researcher and author John Major Jenkins begins his presentation and delivers the goods. According to ancient Mayan cosmology, we live today in a time of rare galactic alignment, when our solar system aligns with the hearts of our galaxy, the galactic center. Our age is a time of transformation fixed by the Maya calendar's end date on December 21st, 2012. Jenkins, an internationally recognized expert on ancient astronomy and the Mayan calendar, recently spoke of his work and life. Quote, I am devoted to reconstructing lost cosmologies, he says, to unraveling the knotted threads of a vast global paradigm now forgotten, end quote. He emphasizes that his work is both an explication and a celebration of the primordial tradition, or perennial philosophy, terms that refer to the universal truths at the core of the world's major religions and philosophies that have endured down the ages. Quote, I believe the human race can grow spiritually by reviving the ancient primordial tradition that has become buried beneath the materialism of the modern world, end quote. And it is Jenkins' discerning and painstaking retro-sleuthing into that tradition that has penetrated the rich substrata beneath the materialism of our time and discovered ancient hidden treasure, namely the galactic alignment, not only at the core of the Mayan calendar, but also at the center of Vedic cosmology and various Old World traditions, including Mithraism, sacred architecture, and Greek sacred geography. If you're not familiar with Mithraism, look up the Mithra. It's a very interesting cult that existed a couple hundred years before Jesus was supposed to have lived. And there are many, many, many parallels between Jesus and Mithra. Anyway, he lays out the details of his progressive reconstruction in two groundbreaking books. Maya Cosmogenesis 2012, The True Meaning of the Maya Calendar, End Date and Galactic Alignment, and Galactic Alignment, The Transformation of Consciousness According to Maya, Egyptian, and Vedic Traditions. In the mid-1990s, while researching the 2012 end date of the Mayan calendar, Jenkins decoded what he calls the galactic cosmology of the Maya. He realized that the ancient Maya understood the 26,000-year cycle known as the precession of the equinoxes and the Earth's changing orientation to the galactic center. For the ancient Maya, tuning in to this stellar shifting inevitably led to the realization that at some point in the far future, the December solstice sun would align with the Milky Way's center, which can be seen as a nuclear bulge between the constellations of Sagittarius and Scorpio. The Maya thought of the galactic center as the ever-renewing womb of the Great Mother and targeted the alignment with the end date of their calendar. Jenkins' approach is to skillfully cross-pollinate the discoveries of archaeoastronomy, iconography, and ethnography, blending them into a profoundly coherent synthesis. This has enabled him to revive a fragmented worldview that he calls multidimensional. He is interested not in inventing a new system, but in reviving the old one that, because of its galactic focus, is advanced in ways that modern science can barely appreciate. By accessing the myths, symbols, texts, and voices of the primordial tradition, Jenkins says that, quote, it is clear that the primordial tradition is galactic in nature. The galactic center is its orientational locus and is the transcendental source of the wisdom it encodes, which now appears ready to make a dramatic appearance on the stage of human history, like a lost Atlantean dimension of the human soul, end quote. That was a tough sentence. Because the astronomical mapping laid out in Jenkins' recent books plugs so meaningfully into the sockets of the alignments and the geodetics of so many sacred sites, the esoteric Hermetic dictum of as above, so below is now really revealed fact. This is particularly true at Izapa in Chiapas, Mexico. Quote, "This is the site that gives us the 2012 calendar," says Jenkins. Here, the Mayan wisdom about what the 2012 alignment means for us is encoded into the monumental scripture. End quote. I'm glad we're on the last article because my voice is starting to go. 3 ceremonial monument groups at Izapa contain the legacy to our time in terms of understanding the galactic cosmology of the ancient Maya. Jenkins decodes the ball court group at Izapa as, quote, "ground zero of this knowledge, and there is plenty there to help us understand what we today are fated to live through. The encoded message of the ball court is a testimony to the brilliance of the ancient Izapan skywatchers," end quote. A Vision Quest. Jenkins recalls that as a child he was fascinated by gadgets and science. Quote, I would take things apart and sometimes put them back together. Thomas Edison was my hero, end quote. Boy, if he only knew. By high school, Jenkins says he had exhausted science as an avenue of self-knowledge and began reading philosophy. Quote, "And that," he says, "led to Eastern mysticism. This opened up a Gnostic path for me, a path of inner knowing, and I began to practice yoga and meditation. I studied Tibetan mysticism, practiced celibacy, and wrote devotional poetry. I was trying to grow spiritually and free myself from the suburban nightmare of materialism that surrounded me," end quote. By the time Jenkins reached 20, that which was building within him was difficult to contain. Quote, "An inner spiritual crisis was welling up inside me, and I embarked on a pilgrimage that took me around the southeast United States. My mobile hermitage was a 1969 Dodge van that I lived in for 7 months. As my pilgrimage reached a crescendo, I meditated, chanted, and fasted in locations along the Gulf Coast or in Forest Service campgrounds in the Florida Panhandle," end quote. Jenkins wrote of this period in his 1991 book, Mirror in the Sky. Quote, "This is the first time I have publicly shared this aspect of my past," he says. The pilgrimage spontaneously culminated in a 3-day vigil, crying for a vision, chanting, and praying. It was a crisis of connection with a higher guiding force that I yearned to serve. In the early pre-dawn hours on the cusp of Pisces, I had a mystical vision of the boon-bestowing goddess Govinda, who I also called the Earth Guardian," end quote. Jenkins says that the experience was attended by what is called in yoga a Kundalini rising. Quote, "It wasn't just a dream or vision, as it was attended by an actual physical process called a turnabout in the deepest seat of the being, or the backward flowing method, described in the Taoist book The Secret of the Golden Flower," end quote. Jenkins believes this experience with the goddess was the boon that bestowed upon him his mission, that led him to the Maya, a path that he now pursues in service to the Great Mother and the perennial wisdom. Quote, "It opened up a path of knowledge for me," he says. "Less than a week after that vision, I met the person who encouraged me to travel to Mexico and visit the Maya," end quote. Around that time, Jenkins also read the now classic Mexico Mystique by Frank Waters. Today, almost 20 years later, Jenkins says that the connection with that original guiding force, quote, "continues to actively work within me, so I can continue to be a mouthpiece for the perennial philosophy. But balancing that call with the demands of making a living and praying at paying the bills has at times been daunting," end quote. Thinking and knowing. About halfway through. Jenkins' mystical learnings are not that apparent in his recent books, which are academically rigorous and well documented without denying the deeper spiritual truths In his view, quote, the intellect is not inconsistent with spirituality. Early on in my research, when my writings shifted from poetry and songwriting to nonfiction research, I felt it would be critical to be clear and concise with my findings, mainly because spiritual materialism in New Age publishing seemed to be diluting the pristine purity of the universal truths with which it was coming into contact. Metaphors drawn from the profane modern culture and new terms were being coined for eternal truths. Distortion of the ancient wisdom was happening, so I decided to place my rational intellect in service to the higher intellect, which is to say the heart. The heart is really higher than the brain. End quote. With this approach, Jenkins' work exemplifies the ability to go beyond the astronomy and venture more deeply into the metaphysics of spiritual transformation that awaits us on our approach to the Galactic Gateway. The Galactic Gateway and its meaning for our time is the focus of galactic alignment. As we approach the 2012 end date of the Maya calendar, it is clear that the knowledge expounded in many of the world's wisdom texts regarding the end of the present world age comes together and is solidly interpreted in Jenkins' latest book. According to his findings, the last of the 4 Hindu cycles of time, called yugas, completes in synchrony with the Mayan end date, as does the age of Pisces. I think the last age of the last of the yugas is the Kali Yuga, but I'm not sure about that. I may be one off on that. Christian millenarianism. Wow. Okay. Christian millennia. I had it and I lost it. Millenarianism via the year 2000 is also surprisingly close to the galactic alignment. The 2012 date itself is the astronomically defined time when the winter solstice sun aligns with the center of the Milky Way. Jenkins surveys the work of the galactic philosopher Oliver Reiser to offer a scientific interpretation of how our solar system and the galactic plane become aligned, and what possible effects might result from life and consciousness on Earth. An inevitable question is, quote, does our changing relationship to the greater universe mean anything, end quote. Jenkins' anticipation of that question is fully developed in Galactic Alignment, but the basis for a response to the question, he insists, is that, quote, what is happening now was the centerpiece of many, many ancient systems and ancient philosophies. In virtually all of the world's traditions, if our own civilization, including our scientific and religious leaders, fails to see any meaning in this factual event, then we stand alone, divorced from the world's traditions that did, end quote. Professor Jocelyn Godwin of Colgate University, himself an author on esoteric subjects, sees value in exploring the 26,000-year precessional cycle, of which the galactic alignment is the completion event. In terms of what it means, he says, quote, John Major Jenkins is the most global and erudite voice of a swelling chorus of galactic center theorists. By framing the subject in the context of the primordial tradition, he raises it to a new level of seriousness and of reassurance, end quote. Jenkins emphasizes that his work does not promote new system or model, but rather offers a reconstruction of lost knowledge. And he notes that, in retrospect, his pursuits seem to have been guided by the initial inspiration of his original contact with the earth goddess of his vision. He senses that strings have been pulled beyond the scenes to help manifest his work, which is ultimately about the rebirth of the world. He says he finds the amount of misunderstanding and misinformation that is circulating incredibly sad, and that most of all he wants his work to be an inspiration to help people understand more deeply ancient teachings about human transformation. We're getting there. Less than 2 pages to go. The beginning is near, the beginning is near. In many of the world's major cultures of antiquity, the center of the Milky Way galaxy was conceived of as the womb of the great Mother Goddess, the source and center of manifest worlds, and the ultimate means of our renewal at the end of a historical chapter. The galactic center region was, to the Maya, a source point or birthplace. Because of this, Jenkins' early rebirth experience with the boon-bestowing goddess is especially meaningful because it led him so directly into the work that has been the revelation of the whole mythic structure surrounding the 2012 astronomical time, when the sun will be rebirthed in the womb of the Great Mother at the center of the Milky Way. Jenkins believes it is especially important to understand that 2012 indicates an alignment process, that any expectation should not focus on one precise day. Nevertheless, 2012 has entered popular consciousness and can be considered the end of a great year of procession, a death of the old and the birth of the new, just as with the turning of the day or the lunar month or the solar year. Our processional journey around the great wheel of the zodiac is humanity's 26,000-year gestation period, and the birth time is era 2012. As in all beginnings, new life is the purpose, but there is always a possibility of mishap or disaster if all is not in harmony with the force and magnitude of the rite of passage known as birth. Resistance versus acceptance can lead to different results. Questions naturally arise concerning what Jenkins sees on the horizon between now and 2012. Jenkins eases his way into his response. Quote, "It may be unpopular to say it, but it's true," he says. "What 2012 was intended to target is not about 2012. It is about a process-oriented shift. It's about an open door, a once-in-a-processional cycle zone of opportunity to align ourselves with the galactic source of life." End quote. He points out that there are forces already set in motion, quote, "propelling us through a crucible of transformation unlike anything experienced in millennia. The sobering and humbling fact is that we are being called to create, nurture, and help unfold something that will not flower until long after we as individuals have died. The larger life wave of humanity is at stake," end quote. And he reminds us of the Native American teaching to look ahead 7 generations in order to make wise decisions, and suggests this should be our guiding maxim as well. As to the 2012 date itself, galactic alignment points the compass of time not to the cause and effect event, but rather to a higher process of spiritual transformation, which can be intense and challenging. If the 2012 date means anything specific, it is more likely to be a rally date for the traditional Maya, whose calendrics designated the 2012 date as the end of a world age, a truth deeply embedded in their creation mythology. The Mesoamerican masterminds who wove together mythology, political organization, religion, and astronomy into one seamless whole must surely have wanted the modern Maya to understand and reclaim the greatness of their people's past achievements. In Galactic Alignment, Jenkins explores how the galactic alignment is a central doctrine in global traditions. He finds it in Mithraism, Vedic astronomy, the doctrine of the Yugas, Islamic astrology, European sacred geography, Christian religious architecture of the Middle Ages, and various Hermetic traditions. Quote, "For me, this means that the galactic alignment wisdom of the Maya 2012 end date is even at the core of Western spirituality and can unify traditions that on the surface seem to be very different." End quote. One wonders how Jenkins sees the core of his work and what is next for him. Quote, "The core? My ongoing relationship with Sophia, the higher wisdom, it was that vision in 1985 and my work with the Tree of Life symbology that have led me into these areas of exploration. The archetype of the Great Mother of renewal and wisdom is a recurring motif that emerges in almost all of my books, even if I wasn't intending it at the outset. Overall, the core of the work is about healing, renewal, and opening up a little door at the end of time that leads into a new world, a new cycle in the drama of human unfolding. End quote. And end article and end section. We are on to part 4, Searching for the Fountainhead. So we will pick up next time with Megalithic England, the Atlantean Dimensions, and Plato, the Truth. So that's going to be another Atlantis one. And they both look relatively short, but we'll probably just do 2 articles because I think that section has quite a bunch of articles in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It has 9. So I'll look at it between now and then and see if I want to do 2 articles or 3 per session. I could do it in 3 sessions if I do 3 articles. If I'm going to do that, though, I might move to a 9 o'clock start instead of a 9:30, but I'll let y'all know. And with that, we'll see you next time for this reading stream. And if you want to come back in a few minutes, I'm going to take a quick break, eat some dinner, because it's late, and then I will play a little bit of Fallout 3. Probably make it a fairly short session, though. Okay? See you all in a little bit.